2020 ICPAU Economic Forum. We pray for more life. We pray for sufficient food on our respective tables wherever we require to eat something. We dedicate this day to you so that we again have a successful day for a forum. Pray all this in the name of God Almighty. Amen. We start off this morning with a topical topic. The topic is implications of COVID-19 on manufacturing and supply systems. Our presenter today is the best suited person to navigate us through the subject. This is a gentleman who has a Bachelor of Information Technology from Makerere University. He has a Master's in Management and Information Systems from the University of Manchester in England. He has vast experience in strategy, management, and communications, and he has demonstrated history of working in the non-organization sector. He is skilled in people management, strategic planning, and program and event planning, coordination, and evaluation. Ladies and gentlemen, our presenter is the Executive Director of the Uganda Manufacturers Association, Mr. Daniel Birungi. Mr. Birungi, you are welcome. The CPAs and other participants in this forum are eagerly awaiting to hear from you, to share your experiences, to share your thoughts, and to hear the thoughts of the UMA about how Uganda is going to, the manufacturing sector is going to take Uganda forward in view of the impacts of COVID-19. You're welcome, Mr. Birungi. Daniel, please, the microphone is yours. You have 1 hour of presentation followed by a Q&A session. Talking about Q&A, I want to emphasize to participants that if you have a question, put it in the Q&A sector of the Zoom webinar. Do the chatting in the chat forum. Please don't chat in the Q&A area. Greet each other in the chat forum. Reserve the Q&A area for questions, which the presenter will address at the end of his presentation. Daniel, please, we are all ears and eyes.
Thank you very much for your very kind introduction. As mentioned, my name is Daniel Birungi and I work with the Uganda Manufacturers Association. It's an honor to be with you today, and it's an honor that the manufacturing sector has been considered worthy of having a spotlight on it at this year's Economic Forum. Just as a bit of a background, for those who don't know about the Uganda Manufacturers Association, I'm duty bound to just give a small brief that the UMA is, of course, a membership association that brings together industrialists and manufacturers in Uganda, that at the moment we are pushing to 1,500 members across the country, and that our core duty is to advance manufacturing in Uganda. We are firm believers in the possibilities that are presented to this country if we have a vibrant manufacturing community. So when we were approached to be part of this session, to highlight the areas where COVID-19 has impacted manufacturing, it was a no-brainer that we would participate, because if there is one thing I know about CPAs, it's that you are the big brains in the country, and who knows, we could get out of this with serious solutions for manufacturing. So thank you so much. Now my presentation, which I'm going to share shortly, my presentation focuses on the implications of COVID-19 on manufacturing. This presentation is formatted in it has three bits in it. The first part looks at the global impact, because in order to understand where we are in Uganda, we need to understand the impact this has had on a global basis. The second looks at the Ugandan context, bringing the story back home. What has been the impact in our market, in our country? The third looks at what have our manufacturers done in light of the COVID-19 pandemic at their factory premises, in their operations. And then finally, I delve into a few of the recommendations that we've given to facilitate faster recovery. Now, globally speaking, definitely no one anticipated COVID-19 and its impact on global supply chains and global manufacturing. And as manufacturers especially, COVID-19 had a great destabilizing effect on operations of our members. A lot of them suffered supply chain disruptions occasioned by limited access to inputs. And these inputs were twofold. There were inputs in terms of raw materials that they could not access, but there were also inputs in terms of spare parts and machinery that had already been ordered that could not get into the country and into other places as well. As you all know, the first place to lock down was Wuhan, and closely followed by the rest of China, resulting in a big impact on access to some of these items, especially since a lot of our products worldwide are made in China. You take an Apple phone, made in China. You take a plastic shoe sold in Uganda, made in China. So it had a significant impact on the stage, and a lot of that involved laying off a lot of workers. This resulted in sometimes production disruptions, because where one was running 5 production lines before, they had moved to lower that to 2 in order to ensure that they kept a pace with the market that had shrunk as a result. There was limited demand, given that consumer confidence dropped. A lot of people were holding on to their money and not willing to spend it in light of uncertainty on how long the COVID-19 pandemic would be on and what more impacts were expected coming ahead. There was also, of course, increased expenditure in terms of expenditure on staffing costs. Staffing costs in terms of accessibility, because where one had to have 7 staff at office and had therefore paid for internet connectivity and access at office, they now had to think about investing in probably laptops, investing in internet for work for the workforce, but also investing in transportation for those who could not afford, for example, manufacturing, afford to have their staff work remotely. As you all know, manufacturing is predominantly a contact-based activity, which essentially means a lot of the work has to take place at a singular place. We are not yet automated enough, at least in Uganda, to facilitate remote working for factory floor workers. So that was a key issue. There was also a lot of expenditure on automation, because in realizing that there was no possibility of working remotely, for example, in the case of manufacturing, we noticed that internationally there was a global push for automation. Of course, there's an attendant discussion, which I won't delve into, onto the impact of automation on jobs, especially for a country like Uganda, whose major goal is job creation. But that's what happened. There was also a reduction in production across various subsectors. We noticed that not only in Uganda, but also internationally, when we reached out to a number of our suppliers, their information to us was that, look, we are cutting back, we've cut back, and we anticipate that order that has usually taken 3 months to get to you will probably take another 6 months because we are cutting down on our staffing, but we're also trying to implement SOPs that ensure that our staff are protected. Now, we certainly did look at what other research was showing, internationally speaking. And in China itself, there was a survey done by Control Engineering. It's one of the leading journals for manufacturing in China. And it indicated that 36% of manufacturing entities that were consulted indicated that they had seen a severe impact on their businesses. 46% said they were negatively affected, but they could not measure the impact. Now, you have to bear in mind that this particular survey was undertaken much earlier in the cycle, around March, April. And at that point, even now anyway, there was limited understanding of how long the pandemic would go on, how long the lockdown measures instituted would go on, and also how long markets would remain closed to products that were coming from China. As you will recall, there was also a time when there was uncertainty about whether contact with products from China would also have an impact on the ability of someone to get COVID-19. That has since been put out to pasture. Now, the next is that 14% indicated that they had no means of measuring the impact. And a lot of these, when you delve into, for those of you who get a chance to read, when you delve into the content, indicate that they could not measure because they did not have the capacity. Their staff were at home, a lot of them. A lot of them were then unable to quantify what the impact of this was going to be on their processes and businesses in the long run. In the US, there was a survey undertaken by PwC, one of the big four. And one of the things that they pointed out was that, especially in manufacturing, there was likely to be a significant impact on jobs, especially since, like I said earlier, jobs in manufacturing were hard to carry out remotely. About 80% of manufacturers expected a financial impact, a negative financial impact on their businesses. Some major industries indicated that they were closing because they could not guarantee the continued operation of their facilities. In Italy, Italy was particularly hard hit, for those of you who recall, and there was a heavy lockdown put in place in Italy. The result being that there was a total breakdown of communication with supply networks. The survey says 100% of the companies surveyed indicated that they had no way of getting in touch with their supply networks. 98% indicated that there was a contraction in manufactured car sales. For the manufacturers of cars, there was a 98% decline in sales. There was a 68% reduction in construction production. There was a 47% reduction in industrial production, and there was a 31% shrink in industrial production compared to the previous year. Finland, pretty much similar story, that new orders in manufacturing went down by 11.3%. a bit lower than you will see in Italy, but that's probably because at the beginning, Finland was one of the first countries to institute measures on social distancing and mask wearing that ensured that that their economy kept moving on. New orders continued declining. Manufacturing orders decreased by 28%, and so on and so forth for Finland. Germany, pretty much the same story. Germany is known as the powerhouse in manufacturing for the world, but 90% of manufacturing companies in Germany also reported that there was a significant disruption in their business, especially in terms of order cuts. A lot of the products from Germany were headed to China, a lot of them were headed to the US, and the rest were headed to Europe. And there was that much decision of their ability to access these markets. Output was also adjusted downwards to the lowest level since 2015. There was also production going down in various manufacturing sectors. I see this subsisting across various regions. If you talk about South Asia, if you talk about the Middle East, if you talk about Europe, and I think it's a no-brainer that this was expected once it became known the magnitude of the challenge we were facing. It was obvious that there was going to be a significant impact across the world. The World Bank, of course, went ahead to downgrade the prospects for the world economy over the course of 2020, as you will all recall. Now, we are in Uganda, so definitely our interest pretty much is what happened with us. That was the situation in Uganda. The UMA, as a matter of practice, continually undertakes surveys with its members because it's the only way we can keep track of what's subsisting in the market. Of course, in May and June, we undertook surveys of our members to understand what the impact was, because at that point, we were also engaging with government on providing advice on what solutions would be expected to support manufacturing. Our surveys attracted about 108 respondents across multiple subsectors. This was indicative. It was an indicative survey of all of them, and the results were quite dire. 44% felt that the negative impact of the pandemic had started being felt once the lockdown measures were instituted. Prior to that, another 33% had indicated that then the impact started when China started locking down, because suddenly they could not access some of the raw materials and inputs that they would traditionally access. But following that, 44% then said, look, and as we speak now, it's now worse. So that's a total of 77% who are saying negative impacts all through. 18% said the negative impacts had happened because of their linkages to China, and as such, they could not effectively access some of these products. 4% were in the silver lining category, because these indicated that the pandemic had created new opportunities for them. As you know, in every situation, there are those who are positioned to take advantage of it. And within this 4% lie the category of those who repurpose their factories to then produce PPE materials, sanitizers, and the like. Those are within the 4%. And then 1%, surprisingly, indicated that the outbreak in no way affected their operations or their production. Now, when you delve deeper into it, when you're looking at how much it impacted individually, you find that 1%, like I said before, indicated the production wasn't affected at all. Another 1% indicated that production increased as a result of the pandemic. 25% just stopped production altogether because there was no way they could carry it on within the prevailing circumstances. 46% scaled down production by 50% or more, and then another 25% scaled down production by, 27% scaled down production by 25%. What was the impact on sales? Looking at sales, 33% indicated that sales were not affected at all. Another 20% indicated that sales reduced by 50%. 27% indicated that sales reduced by 25%. 13% talked about a 75% reduction in their sales, while 7% just could not sell anything at all and were totally out of business. So an analysis of this shows you that 27% of manufacturers were affected in some way, either by sales reducing by 25% or more over the of the period. What happened to cash flows? Of course, in light of reduced sales, it is expectant that there is also an impact, a direct impact on cash flows. And as you will see, it clearly shows that 33%, in line with what we said earlier, are not affected at all. The cash flows stayed pretty much the same. But 77% had an element of cash flow disruption. From the 7% who said for them, no money was coming in at all. And since the outbreak of the pandemic, they had not done anything that was providing them with cash flow. 13% in 75% of their cash flows had been wiped away, and they were now unable to serve their markets accordingly. 27% saw a reduction of 25%, while 20% saw a reduction of 50% in their cash flows. This has significant impact on the employment levels as well. Now, when we delve deeper and reached out to them to say, okay, yes, we understand the impact. Tell us, where do you lie in terms of how much money you need for you to be able to sustain yourselves into the period beyond COVID, as we know it at the moment? They indicated that, well, 45% of them were looking for financing to the tune of $1 to $1 million that would be able to effectively manage their cash flow challenges until the time when they would be opening up. Another 18% indicated that they needed anywhere between $100,000 and I'm sorry, the host muted me, but I hope you can hear me.
Yes, Daniel, we can hear you. Please go ahead. All
right. So another 18% indicated that between $100,000 and $500,000 was what they needed to significantly manage their cash flows. 12% indicated they needed $1 million and above in order to manage this, and so on and so forth, as you clearly see on the slide before you. Now, one of the things that I mentioned at the beginning of this was that significant impact was focused on the supply system of the manufacturers. A lot of them were unable to carry on business as usual, obviously, given that there was a lockdown instituted. Some of them were unable to access banks to carry out transactions. And so when we delve deeper into that, we find that some of them indicated that, look, because of flight restrictions and transport restrictions, they were unable totally to service their export markets. Now, this is significant because, as you know, we are working on an export development strategy that seeks to push us into an export country. And so that was a key concern for us. I also mentioned earlier the issue of access to raw materials, and especially those coming from China, India, and Germany, because these countries had instituted significant lockdowns. It was impossible to get raw materials out of there. But you see, the other issue as well was that a lot of our manufacturers pointed out to us that when they reached out to their shipping lines, the shipping lines would indicate to them, look, we have a ship ready, but our staff on those ships have been quarantined for the next 30 days because we are unsure about infection. And so that also had its own impact on the ability of access to some of these issues. Key personnel were held up for long in affected countries. I have an example of a manufacturer who had one of their top personnel in Botswana for 3 months, starting June, unable to come in because, starting March, unable to come in because, of course, there were no flights into Uganda at that point. This was a key stuck in a foreign country. Of course, you know the impact that can have on you as a company. Then there were those who also had challenges that were more local in nature, that there were goods that were stuck between Mombasa and Kampala, either as a result of curfew restrictions or lockdown restrictions in Kenya, as a result of port hours reducing. Remember, at the beginning of this, the Mombasa port also had to curtail its port hours, resulting in significant disruptions. Then, of course, there was the testing disruptions that were occasioned at the Malaba border. Many of you will recall the photos of the long queues of trucks that were held up and unable to then move into the country and bring in product. So that was part of the challenge. Some indicated that the goods were in bonded warehouses in Kampala, but they were unable to do the clearance because at the very beginning, our members were unable to move around as well because it took a while for government to offer the option of having stickers for essential workers. Now, during that period, you can imagine you are a manufacturer, your goods are incurring demurrage, but you cannot physically go to deliver some of the items, some of the documents that are required, and the systems are just being upgraded to accommodate automated delivery of some of these items. Then, of course, the other issue was the workers in the factory being unable to move freely from March to June. In the beginning, of course, there was a total lockdown that was made it impossible for any movement whatsoever. A lot of our members, as you will see in the next slide, went ahead to institute measures where they would put their workers, embed their workers within the workplace so that production could continue. But those were those that had massive spaces and a bit of cash flow available to invest in this kind of initiative, because as you would imagine, you need sanitation facilities, you need accommodation facilities, food facilities, and a lot of other things that you probably had not planned for. Eventually, there was an easing of lockdown, if you will recall, with the allowance that people could move to work within a certain time period. The challenge was, as you would know, the majority of factory floor workers definitely use public means. Now, these public means were unavailable for a certain period, meaning that for those companies that could, they had to then seek permission to utilize passenger service vans to move their workers from A to B, with significant impact on their ability to operate. But even in spite of that, there was also the challenge that even when you are doing that, you had to do it within set parameters. Remember at the beginning, by 5, we had to be where we were supposed to be so that we would not fall afoul of the curfew rules. The impact of that was for those companies that were used to having 2 shifts, each working 11 to 12 hours, those were now unable to do that because now you had to work within the confines of the daytime hours that were provided. Now, what were the reactions of our manufacturers to the pandemic? One is definitely we worked with them to ensure that at company level, there was a realization that this was a real issue that required significant understanding within the company and significant and robust initiatives to enable your staff survive the pandemic, but to also enable your operations go on. This institution of Ministry of Health SOPs at company level, we worked with our members to develop manufacturing specific SOPs that we then pushed out to our members for them to fully appreciate what was required within their factories. This included, of course, temperature checks and recording at entry. It included hand washing stations at various locations within the factory. It included designation of champions who were responsible for continually wiping down surfaces, including machinery, in light of the multi-use nature of most of our machinery in our factories. Of course, the other bit was, in addition to that, we needed specific people designated both at management, factory floor, and other levels to focus on ensuring that we were carrying out the SOPs within our factories. This entailed significant training, but also entailed that we invested heavily in making our factories COVID-proof. The UMA also took a vetting initiative where we would go to factories, analyze their readiness, and give them guidelines on what they needed to change in order to be able to effectively manage the COVID-19 pandemic. We all encouraged our manufacturers to institute a no mask, no entry policy for their factories with significant sanctions for those who failed to comply, and they took this up as well. Limitation of physical interaction, and this was by reducing the number of people who come to factories. A lot of our members moved a lot of their supply chain elements online. I know companies where rather than have physical delivery of documentation by truck drivers bringing in materials, these were then handled at the level of the logistic company that was handling this and sent through by email and cleared. So there was limited interaction because we found that in a number of cases, truck drivers were exposed to the pandemic given the movement they were doing, and as such were putting at risk the factory workers. Of course, like I said, there was also the move to introduce new production lines for personal protective equipment. At the beginning of the pandemic, we hardly had 1 or 2 companies that were doing sanitizer. At the point, as I speak, I have about 45 companies that have gone into that area because suddenly it was one of the most marketable items on the market. We had members from our alcohol side also repurposing their production lines, given that their addressable market was at home. They focused on utilizing their production for something else. We've had investments in production of masks, and these are medical grade masks, the KN95 and surgical masks within the country. And I'm glad to report that we now have members who are exporting these products beyond Uganda as well. So that was a positive move on the part of our members. These are some of the pictures of what we've seen at our different companies. You can see a hand washing station, a couple of them installed at various locations. We also encouraged our members to also do some support to government beyond just beyond the taxes they contribute. And as you will recall, we had about 2 billion to 3 billion shillings worth of products supplied to government to support the effort of enabling the marginalized members of our community, of our society, to access food, to access soap, to access sanitation equipment as well. And that was also quite welcome. We also developed, as you can see, some IEC materials that were sent out to our factories for them to put in visible places so that whoever came in was able to see that they needed to focus on COVID-19 as a real threat and as one that they needed to address. You can see a temperature gun there as well. Now, of course, another thing they did was institution of regular sanitizing protocols to ensure that the facilities were fine. There was also a section of our members who managed to get some of their workers to work from home. This was mostly in cases where our members had ERPs in place who are accessible beyond the factory. So a significant portion of the back office staff would then work remotely. There was also a limitation of the number of workers available at the workplace at any one time, with an insistence that perhaps rather than have 70 people in a shift, are reduced to 30 and then work fewer hours, but to ensure that everyone gets a chance to still access money. Regular testing protocols, I've already mentioned about that, and this is continuing, that our members continually reach out to the Ministry of Health and pay for the testing of their members to mitigate a widespread COVID-19 pandemic within their premises. We've had a few elements of infection, but these are being managed through isolation and quarantine. And then transportation, I mentioned this, that our members were providing transport to take their workers from home to the workplace and back along the way. Now, along the way, we also went ahead to work with our members to designate, to understand what did they want, what did they need as support from government. One of the first things we did was to have an engagement with the National Social Security Fund. I remember it was the 1st of May, Labor Day. And one of the things we pushed for with them was for an extension in the period of payment for statutory dues, especially due to NSSF, given the fact that action had been shot out of the window, there was limited cash flows. Unfortunately, this was done with an extension up to September, which is now, although we are still trying to push that further because we haven't seen a recovery in the marketplace yet. The other one was a push for excise duty exemption for manufactured healthcare products, because we noted that if we were to encourage usage of these products in the market, we needed to provide them at an amount that was easily accessible by the wider public. As such, PPEs, hand sanitizers, face masks, these were items we pushed for excise duty exemption for purposes of enabling them do this. We also pushed for loan repayment restructuring. Our push was for a period of at least 12 months because we understood that COVID-19 was going to be with us for quite a while. And as such, we wanted to have certainty that our manufacturers could continue production without worrying about the impact of loans that were running on their operations. This is still a discussion in progress. Something has been done by the Bank of Uganda in this regard, but a lot more remains to be seen to help that. We also requested for an extension in the period for submission of VAT returns. And this was obvious because given that sales were not being made in time, there was a likelihood that input VAT would come back to haunt our members along the way, given that they were not bringing in money. We also pushed for recapitalization of UDB and UDC. This was successful. And our members are beginning to access the finances with those banks. And then the last one was deferment of tax payment without interest or penalty for 6 months. Fortunately, URA listened to some of these ideas and went ahead to institute them. Now, this is by no means the end of the discussion on COVID-19 mitigation, because as you are aware, we are still having challenges as an economy, as manufacturers, in terms of access to our addressable market. If I give you the example of the beverage sector, whose addressable market is usually events and functions, those are totally out of the window, and as such, they are unable to test the market. However, on the flip side of it is that in spite of that reduction in market, they are still expected to take on a new cost in the digital tax stamps that is likely to affect them along the way. And this is really the case for a number of areas. We are seeing a situation where the consumer is holding on to money with the understanding that, one, they are unsure of how long the current measures are going to go on. They have increased costs at home as a result of their children being at home, everyone being back at home, and so a focus on consumption is limited. There is also the matter of the upcoming election and the fact that traditionally we notice a slowdown in production as we approach an election period. Now, we are worried that given that this election period comes time when there is already a slowdown that has been brought on board as a result of COVID-19, what's the likely impact of this on the ability of our manufacturers to survive? However, not to paint a very gloomy picture, one thing about manufacturing is our manufacturers are resilient people. You can't enter manufacturing if you're not resilient. And they've continually engaged with us, continually engaged with government in the hope that some new measures are going to keep coming up to assist in alleviating the impact of the negative impact of COVID-19 on them and their operations. Now, in conclusion, of course, we believe that there's scope for a discussion between government and the wider private sector, manufacturing, but CPAs such as yourselves, the banks, to come up with measures, more measures that can look at how we bring the economy back to life post-COVID-19. Because yes, it is with us now. We are undertaking all the SOPs. We are testing, we are increasing our testing capacity as a country, but we also need to start looking at, okay, now how do we prepare our economy to bounce back post the COVID-19 pandemic? What are some of the areas we're thinking of as a manufacturers association in this regard? Some of them include, one, the fact that we realize that as a country, we are significantly blessed by our location, which is just adjacent to the Democratic Republic of Congo. If you walk into an average supermarket in the DRC, you will find that the milk on the shelf comes from Belgium, the bottled water probably comes from France, the cheese comes from maybe Ireland, and we see this as a significant opportunity for this country to say, can we open up new markets? Because the Ugandan market alone may not be sufficient even to enable us to recover effectively. But we have the DRC as an option, and we need to work towards opening it up. What does it need? Probably a bit of infrastructure spend. We've done it in South Sudan before. We can do it in the DRC. A bit of collaboration, a bit of productive engagement by entities such as yourselves to see how we can also extend services such as the significant accounting services that we have in plenty in Uganda into a country like DRC, so that when I am accessing that market, I'm not worried about complying with different rules because I have my CPA with me who is able to handhold me into the market. This is also the case for markets which are volatile in nature. For example, Somalia, where we have been at the forefront of exporting peace through the engagement of our army as part of the AMISOM contingent there. And we're saying, yes, beyond exporting peace, let's also export products, because we are the natural partner for Somalia in terms of product access to that market. Of course, someone will ask, what about the East African market? And we are definitely mindful about the East African market. And one of our key areas of policy advocacy has been around enhancing the capacity to enforce the Common Market Protocol as it is. It speaks about free movement of labor, it speaks about free movement of services, and free movement of goods. The challenge still remains that to date, we still have cases where individual countries can stand up and say, no, I'm not allowing this product into my country. And we think if we are to grow as an economy, to grow as a unit, as East Africa, these should be things in the past, because only then can we access some of these markets. The other one is, of course, increased support to the manufacturing sector. We've seen what Vision 2040 talks about, and the NDP3 that is currently in operation. They all focus on manufacturing. Why? Because manufacturing is an avenue to generate jobs. we have a very young population, which requires jobs as one of its most needed items. And we need more discussions and engagement on how we can stimulate manufacturing. We need more discussions on how we can lower taxes on inputs and administrative levies on inputs, so that, yes, we get the taxes on the finished product, but the inputs come in at a rate that is much lower, or at zero, if possible, for any input that is not available within the region. Because then we are stimulating the ability of our manufacturers to produce at a cost that is affordable, and also to provide the products to the consumers at an affordable cost. Of course, lastly, and one we always talk about, is the issue of electricity, cost of electricity. We know that there's been significant investment in power production within the country. Karuma is coming on board. The challenge is still the evacuation of the power from Karuma. And we're saying that being a landlocked country, or land-linked, if we're being politically correct, we need to look at how we can enable our manufacturers compete with countries that are not landlocked. Because at the end of the day, if you have a manufacturer in Uganda competing on the same product with a manufacturer from China, the challenge is the Chinese manufacturer has access to finance. The Chinese manufacturer has power costs that are as low as 5 US cents per kilowatt hour or lower. We are at an average of 8 to 12 US cents per kilowatt hour. That manufacturer has access to a port. So at the end of the day, those products are going to get into Uganda significantly cheaper than products made here, because we are importing a lot of the raw materials. Our push has been, let's talk about addressing those niggly little things that impact our ability to be competitive. Because then we not only address the issue of the domestic market, but in light of the upcoming African Continental Free Trade Area, we also address access to the market at the continental level. So I would like to end here by thanking you again for the opportunity to present, and handing back to the chairman for questions, comments, and anything else. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Birungi. We'll applaud you befittingly at the end of the session, because now we are going into interaction with the audience. But I just wanted to make a comment that this was a well-researched and well-thought-out presentation. We thank you very much, and we thank the organization for a thorough research on the topic and being on top of your subject. And also the recommendations going forward seem to be very pertinent, and let's all hope that they will see action from the authorities that are. As of now, we have two questions. One from Washington Musamali. This is asking, who is in charge of the economic sector recovery program in as far as recommendations are concerned? Or is it left to government to set the criteria through Uganda Development Bank with recommendations from politicians? Daniel, will you attempt that? Then there is another one from Stephen Enabwe Tieku. He starts off by thanking you for the presentation, and says it's a known fact that the cost of electricity in this country is among the highest in the region, despite us exporting power to our neighbors, which has significantly affected manufacturing in the country. What is UMA doing to ensure that we bring down these tariff rates and boost the sector and possibly SMEs in the economy. The other one was from a comment from Jobra, but that one will answer. That's a domestic question within the institute. We'll answer that one. So Daniel, would you like to have a go at those two questions, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. Speaking to the question from Washington Musamali, regarding economic sector recovery programs. I think these are domiciled within the Ministry of Finance. That's really where the cooking is done. I must admit that we do participate in those discussions, and we do forward our requests in terms of areas of support, areas of facilitation. We must say that at least we are seeing significant movement in terms of listenership to what we're saying, in terms of agreeing to some of the policy recommendations that we put across. I do agree with you that perhaps there could be faster movement. I think we've been a bit slow, especially in disbursing the funds that were due to economic recovery. I think the processes are quite long and drawn out. And it's one of the things we're now working on to see how can we hasten the process of issuing this money, because one of the things I keep saying is the manufacturers need this money yesterday. They don't need it a month from now, because with each passing day, we are seeing people come to us and saying, look, my factory is struggling, can you find me a buyer? And we do not want to get too many of those, because as many of you would probably know, if you look at the international outlook for FDI, it shows that there is a significant reduction and a significant expected reduction of FDI over the next 2 years, with the recovery expected within the third year. That points to a significant problem, especially for a country that is positioned to bring in FDI as one of the areas of investment development. Now, to the question by Mr. Stephen Enabu regarding electricity. Yes, certainly our cost of electricity is high, but actually, not to defend the electricity sector, because I'm never one to do that, but it's rather competitively priced at the regional level. The challenge still remains that we are not, I keep saying we are not competing with Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, Burundi. We are competing with the world, because we are in a globalized economy. And that is why today you will have KPMG and PwC and the other international brands here, also competing alongside the domestically grown brands. It's because that's the nature of the world we live in. And as such, our benchmark shouldn't even be East Africa. It should be, if you want to go to Africa, it should be, for example, Egypt. Because at the end of the day, goods coming from COMESA into Uganda at zero duty. That means that a manufacturer in Egypt producing an item that is not considered sensitive in East Africa is able to bring in their product at zero duty. And that means they're competing directly with the manufacturer here. So what is the situation there? Like I said, 5 US cents per kilowatt hour. They have port, we don't. They have access to the European market, and they have access to significant inputs from the Arabian Peninsula and the like. So those are some of the things we need to be front and center. What are we doing about it? That was the question. What we're doing about it is we are in continuous engagement with the Electricity Regulatory Authority to try and mitigate the impact of energy costs on manufacturing. Every quarter, we sit down with the regulatory authority and work with them to get to an agreeable costing of power tariffs, so that there is no arbitrary increment in power cost to manufacturers. In addition, one of the things that we are very happy to have lobbied for and that has come through is the issue of rebates to manufacturers who invest in infrastructure, power infrastructure. As it is now, it is possible for a manufacturer in a location where there are other off-takers to invest in a power line coming to that location and have that investment, having been recognized by the regulatory authority, have that investment removed from their monthly bills going forward until a point when that investment has been recouped. We think this is a significant step in the right direction. But we're also lobbying further to say the limitation to say it has to be in an area where others are interested in off-taking also serves to limit the locations where manufacturers can set up. You and I all know that Kampala is saturated with industries. We need to also start thinking of the 21 other industrial parks in this country that hardly have occupancy. How do we get them to be utilized? The third bit is we're also lobbying for plug-and-play facilities. And by this I mean that if we are marketing an industrial park and we are telling a manufacturer to set up in that industrial park, the setup should be that the manufacturer is only left with plugging in their machinery and moving forward. The challenge is that as it is now, infrastructure in some of these industrial parks, especially in terms of energy access, is still wanting, and there's still a lot of investment required in that area. The other one is around the quality of electricity and ensuring that we consistently have the same quality, the good quality of electricity, because some of the industries we're working with are quite sensitive in terms of machinery. The machinery they have may not be able to run on backup power, but in addition to that, any breakdown in power, any fluctuation means that the machines shut down. Now, if you're doing that in a steel furnace, if you're doing that in a clinker factory, in a clinker furnace, these are the ones that then go on to make cement. It means that whatever batch is within that furnace is lost. And that is a significant cost to manufacturing, which we cannot afford. But the other thing also is that where we could provide 24-hour manufacturing, it's no longer the case, because in some cases, there is still elements of power going off for 12 hours at a go. Now, these workers are at work. These workers are already at work. They have to be paid, but they are unable to do anything. And so these are some of the things we're working on, but there's a significant policy advocacy initiative that we are on to ensure that the cost of power continues to go down. I'm glad that over the past 4 years, it has gone down from highs of 12, 13 US cents per kilowatt hour to an average of 8 to 9 US cents per kilowatt hour on average, if you balance out the nighttime and daytime costs. And it's work that is ongoing. Chairman, over to you.
Thank you, Daniel. This is from me. What is the stance of Uganda Manufacturers Association on bubu? Because we didn't seem to hear you. The topic didn't really require you to go into bubu, but just for interest, how is UMA fighting for bubu, advocating for bubu? What are the anticipated wins and also the anticipated challenges with bubu? Yes.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Now, on bubu, we are the home of bubu because the concept of bubu really started here to push for procurement of domestically produced items. Just to give a bit of background for those who don't know, Uganda's manufacturers contribute about 36% of the tax revenue of this country, use about 70% of the electricity we produce in this country. And based on that, our feeling was we cannot only be taking a small fraction of the 40 trillion budget that is announced annually by the Ministry of Finance. Our push has been that in areas of public expenditure, where we have demonstrated significant capacity, where we can meet the quality, there is no reason why these products should be imported. Because in doing the importation, we are exporting jobs we badly need to the likes of China, to the likes of India, to the likes of all the other areas. Mark you, I think one thing that people keep mistaking about Bubu is they tend to think that we are restricting their access to items coming from elsewhere. No, we are not. We are saying, first of all, our first focus is public expenditure. That if government is spending money, be it project money, be it money that comes out of regular appropriation, this money should go to local companies because then it trickles back into the economy. Now, what are some of the successes that we are seeing? We have existent reservation guidelines that are in place that have seen sectors such as cement, sectors such as textile, sectors such as electricity cables benefit from government procurement. Our analysis indicates that in these sectors, number one, capacity utilization has gone up from 54% to approximately 68%. Some are pushing 75% because of that ability to supply government. Number two, we're seeing that employment in these industries has also gone up by significant margins. Number three, we are seeing that usage of electricity, which is a sign of production, but which also supports us in lowering cost of production, because as all of you know, the cost of power is dependent on usage. It's a paid for cost whether we use the power or not. So the more people who use it, or the more of it we use, the lower the costs go. Now, that being the case, an increment in usage of electricity is a good thing, that it shows that production is growing, but it also shows that there's a trajectory to a reduction in cost of power. So with this example, we are now saying, okay, here is the evidence that this actually works. Can we expand it to other sectors? And we are actually not saying this by sitting in our boardroom and saying, now let's do it for milk and rubber and whatever. No. We are engaging with the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Assets Authority. We are engaging with Uganda National Bureau of Standards. We are also engaging with Uganda Bureau of Statistics so that we can verify the statistics that have been provided and as far as capacity is concerned. So we've done our study as the UMA with our members. We've presented our findings to the relevant authorities, and we are now awaiting a move to the field once COVID-19 is out of the way, where we verify these capacities. Because we believe that whatever we ask for has to be backed by qualitative evidence that is triangulated among the different bodies. And so that if we get to the point where we know that we have enough of this in the market, there is no reason why that should be imported. That should be bought here. If you want to import it, well and good, pay a premium for it, because you are opting not to support your country, you're not opting not to support development here. Now, I will tag on to that question, the question on quality, because someone, Plaxeda, asked the question about quality and whether the quality of our products is right. One of the things we are doing, like I said earlier, is working with the Uganda National Bureau of Standards, because as you know, by mandate, the Uganda National Bureau of Standards is mandated to check standard, to set standards first of all, and then to check compliance to those standards, and to ensure that whatever product is on the market fits the standards that have been given. So on the standard side, we are also ensuring and working with our members to push them to certify their products. Then working with the public to say, if a product is not certified, we cannot 100% stand behind it. Ask us whether the lack of certification is a result of maybe absence of standards that are in development. But where there are standards already in existence, our product